From Anakin's turn to the dark side in Revenge of the Sith to Empire Strikes Back's iconic I am your father moment, everyone got a favorite Star Wars movie, including the Mandalorian star Pedro Pascal. But unlike most other fans of the franchise, Pascal actually thinks Return of the Jedi is the best Star Wars film. Yep, the actor recently made an appearance on Late Night with Seth Meyers to promote Season 3 of The Mandalorian.
And there are pretty intense and complicated action sequences which are described to you like, you know, it just turns into this kind of language.
During the interview, he was asked about his history with the franchise. And, surprise, surprise, he's been a Star Wars fan since childhood. I mean, this guy literally knows how to make audiences love him. But while he spoke about how he vaguely remembered watching Empire Strikes Back as a young kid.
And it was this huge adventure because here we are, all of us in Colombia together.
The movie that really stood out to him was Episode 6, Return of the Jedi. Remember, Pascal would have been like 8 years old at the time, so it's not like he was going in and doing a critical analysis of the movie. So you can probably guess why he loved it so much. Yep, it's the Ewoks.
Is Pedro Pascal deaf?
Why don't you answer that?
He certainly is.
Oscar would say that I was.
Now, the actor sorta winced while saying this. After all, Star Wars fans are notoriously dismissive of Episode 6. As a matter of fact, back in the day, a lot of people even hated the movie just because it got a bit too silly with all the Ewok stuff.
Yeah, he is.
Protecting.
Yeah.
I think if I say any more,
Yep, don't say it.
I'll be replaced.
I mean, there's literally a galactic war happening, and then you've got these little teddy bear dudes killing stormtroopers. It does get a bit silly. But while Pascal was expecting everyone to act surprised and instantly started hating him, the audience was supportive of his choice.
Great, it was great. He had an incredible translator, but if you see the movie, which you should, it's a lot of fun. Monsters are attacking the Great Wall of China.
Though I'm obviously kidding here, because if you disagree with Pedro, you're just wrong. Now, interestingly, Seth Meyers interjected here, saying that he feels the same way. For him, it was just the fact that he was a child, and The Return of the Jedi was the movie that he remembered the most from that time. After all,
Prized possession.
You want to try to look at it?
Yeah. It helps to kind of actually visualize the words.
Empire Strikes Back would have probably been a bit too soon for him, just like it was for Pedro. So it all came down to one simple thing. You just gravitate toward the thing from your generation. You know, it's kind of like your favorite SNL cast or your favorite music genre. Most people tend to like the stuff they grew up with, which, I mean, fair enough. And for that very reason, Pascal also likes Episode 6.
I think it's just really brave of Fox to make a big, make a sequel with a bunch of nobodies.
Even if it's been quote-unquote universally touted as the weakest of the OG trilogy. Now, I totally get where he's coming from as well though. Like, as much as people like to slate the movie for not being a worthy follow-up to Episode 5, you can't deny that it didn't have some of the coolest Star Wars moments.
Do you ever look at Instagram accounts devoted to you being a heartthrob when you're feeling down?
Yes, I do.
I mean, Luke Skywalker's black outfit alone should bump it up your rankings. Not to mention, Vader's redemption at the end is also an incredible moment, especially when you've got the added context of the prequels. It honestly does a pretty good job of capping off one of the best sci-fi trilogies of all time. But seeing Pascal's love for Return of the Jedi, there's perhaps a greater discussion to be had.
I went to New York at 18. I saw Shanghai Triad in 96, maybe 4 times at the Angelica movie theater.
About Star Wars trilogies. After all, each of them has its own fan base. Take the prequels, for example. They were the biggest thing in the world back in the late 90s. Everyone was clamoring to see Anakin Skywalker's story and how he finally became Vader. Not to mention, it'd been almost 2 decades since the last Star Wars movie. And yet, when The Phantom Menace came out, pretty much everyone hated it. It wasn't the Star Wars they'd grown up watching. It was slow, political, and just not that magical. Oh, and the dialogue?
Where is Pedro Pascal from?
I am from Santiago, Chile.
Okay.
Kinda terrible. In fact, the movies were so widely hated that Hayden Christensen literally left acting for a while. But you see, the prequel trilogy wasn't really made for fans of the OG trilogy, because after 2 decades of everyone disliking it, people have actually started to come around to it. In fact, I'd go as far as to say that the prequel fandom is arguably the most active one, at least on the internet. After all, people who watched these movies as kids have now grown up to have their own individual voices on social media. Also, it's it's pretty evident from the fact that Obi-Wan Kenobi got made as well. Again, you could say that the prequels are bad, but you can't deny that they're also super iconic. Besides,
Excited?
I'm super excited. I think it's the top of everybody's bucket list. I am scared.
all the memes we've gotten from them have made it all worth it anyway. Now, speaking of Star Wars trilogies that got a bunch of hate upon release, it's time to talk about the sequels. I mean, if you really think about it, these could be having their prequel moments, right? Like, sure, they're all pretty flawed in a bunch of different ways, but again, maybe 20 years down the line, people will start to love these too. Well, at least that's what you'd think. With that said, the sequels do have some very inherent flaws that might actually live on forever. For instance, these movies are just full of plot holes that don't make sense at all. Seriously, if you're a Star Wars fan, you probably know what I'm talking about. From somehow Palpatine returned to Rey somehow lining up a Sith knife perfectly from a random point on an island, some of it is just mind-boggling stuff. And in all honesty, it's not just something you can fix that easily. In comparison, the majority of issues with the prequels were with the dialogue and pacing, like how Anakin Skywalker just sounded like a bit of a weird dude, though in his defense, he was meant to be this angry young Jedi who didn't live a normal life. Basically, my point is that you can still kinda explain why the prequels felt off, but the sequel trilogy, well, that just feels like a case of some really bad management. With that said, there are ways it could be fondly remembered eventually. After all, Lucasfilm is trying to fill in the gaps with all the TV shows. For instance, that whole Palpatine coming back thing, we're probably gonna learn about it soon thanks to the Force cloning plot point in The Mandalorian. On top of that, the Ahsoka show could also delve into Luke Skywalker's Jedi Academy and the rise of the First Order. Like, a lot of these issues do stem from the fact that people just haven't seen these characters in the time between episodes 6 and 7. So perhaps Luke turning into this detached hermit and abandoning everything wasn't an abrupt change. I mean, people do grow and change the way they think with time, and sometimes that change can just be bad, especially if you've watched your nephew kill your students after you inadvertently pushed him to the dark side. Like, these things can be fixed. Though, while Star Wars fans will continue to debate on whether the sequels or prequels have redeeming qualities, one thing is for sure, the OG trilogy is timeless. I mean, even if Episode 6 doesn't get the flowers it deserves, it's still ranked super highly in most Star Wars lists. Not to mention, the other two movies are pretty much faultless. Everything from the pacing to the characters is absolutely top-notch. Plus, they were also incredibly impressive in terms of the tech they used back in the day. Make no mistake, A New Hope was a revolutionary film, not only for the sci-fi genre, but for movies as a whole. It was ambitious, and it delivered. Besides, the fact that it stood the test of time over 4 decades later is a testament to how good it is. And that's why Pedro Pascal choosing Return of the Jedi as his favorite Star Wars movie makes total sense.
The last time I was at a celebration was in the beginning of 2019, and we've all been through a lot since then.